Millionaire invites her black maid son to play chess as a joke. She didn't know he was a child genius. Come here, boy, how about showing me how you play chess? In the slums, Mrs. Victoria Whitman's voice echoed through the living room of her Beverly Hills mansion, laden with the arrogance typical of someone who has never had to earn anything on her own. Diego Santos, 17, was helping his mother, Carmen, serve guests at a charity dinner when the millionaire decided to make him the evening's entertainment. The other guests, businessmen, politicians, and their boardwives, laughed discreetly behind their 1,000 champagne glasses. Victoria had organized the event to raise funds for underprivileged youth, but clearly she hadn't expected to have one of them serving canapés in her own home. The irony was delicious to her. I bet he can at least move the pieces, Victoria continued, gesturing toward the Italian chessboard that decorated the coffee table. It'll be fun to see what this boy can do against someone who's actually studied the game. Mr. Hamilton, owner of 3 hotel chains, whispered to his wife, I bet he doesn't even know the knight moves in an L shape. Laughter spread through the room like waves on a lake of superiority. Diego's mother, Carmen, lowered her eyes and clenched her fist around the silver tray. 20 years cleaning that house, raising her son alone on a maid's salary, and she still had to watch her boss use her boy as a joke to impress her rich friends. She had known Victoria since she was young. She had seen the woman transform from a spoiled heiress into a cruel socialite over the years. Carmen, you can stop serving for a few minutes, Victoria ordered with false kindness. I want you to watch your son play. It will be educational for both of you. Diego, however, remained motionless for a few seconds, his dark eyes analyzing not only the board, but every face in the room. At 17, he had already learned that silence often reveals more about people than 1,000 words, and at that moment, what he saw was a group of privileged adults who had no idea who they were dealing with. There was something about Diego's posture that made some of the guests stop laughing. A strange stillness like the calm before the storm. His fingers moved, unconsciously, as if he were visualizing moves on an invisible board. Of course, Mrs. Whitman, Diego replied with a calmness that made some of the guests exchange curious glances. It will be my pleasure. Victoria smiled with satisfaction, settling into the leather armchair like a queen preparing to watch gladiators. Excellent. I bet you've never played on a board like this, have you? Genuine Italian marble, each piece worth more than well, you know. State Representative Jennifer Mills, sitting near the window, commented aloud. Victoria, are you sure this isn't cruel? The poor boy is going to be humiliated. Nonsense, Victoria retorted, adjusting her diamond earrings. It's a learning opportunity. He'll tell his friends he played chess in a real mansion. What Victoria Whitman didn't know and would find out in the worst possible way was that this slum kid had spent the last 8 years studying every opening, every strategy, every trap the grandmasters had ever devised. While his schoolmates played video games, Diego devoured chess books borrowed from the public library and watched legendary matches on the broken computer he had managed to fix himself. In the silent early hours of the morning, when Carmen worked double shifts cleaning, Diego analyzed games by Kasparov, Pfizer, and Carlsen. He had memorized more than 200 different openings and could recite the 50 most famous defenses in chess history by heart. But most importantly, she had no idea that she was about to be humiliated by the same boy she had underestimated, out of pure prejudice in front of all her powerful friends. And when the truth came out, it wouldn't just be a chess defeat. It would be a lesson she would carry with her for the rest of her life. While Victoria arranged the pieces with theatrical movements, Diego watched each guest. Something in his eyes suggested that he wasn't just preparing for a game. He was preparing to rewrite every assumption in that room about who really deserved respect. If this story of prejudice and overcoming adversity has touched you, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, because what happened next showed that judging someone by their appearance can be the most expensive mistake a person makes in their life. Victoria took her place on the white side with the confidence of someone who had never lost anything important in her life. I always play white, dear. It's a family tradition, she said, completely ignoring the fact that in serious chess, the color of the pieces is decided by drawing lots. Diego nodded silently and arranged his black pieces with a precision that made Mr. Hamilton frown. Each piece was placed exactly in the center of its square, perfectly aligned, as if that Italian marble board were just one of the hundreds he had faced before. Let's make this interesting, Victoria announced to the guests. If the boy manages to give me even one scare, I'll donate $1,000 to, I don't know, some public school. Laughter echoed through the room again. But this time Diego looked up and smiled, a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Carmen felt a chill run down her spine. She knew that smile. It was the same one Diego had as a child whenever someone underestimated him in school competitions. The same smile he had used at 12 when he said he no longer needed her help with his math homework. Victoria opened the game with a conservative pawn move, e4. Indian king, dear. A classic opening we learned at Harvard, she explained condescendingly, as if she were teaching a child to tie his shoes. Diego responded instantly, c5, the Sicilian defense. An awkward silence filled the room. That wasn't the move of someone who might know how to move the pieces. It was the response of someone who knew theory. Interesting, murmured Congresswoman Mills, leaning forward. Victoria hesitated for 3 seconds, long enough for Diego to realize that she had memorized half a dozen openings, but didn't really understand the principles behind them. She played NF3, following a pattern she had probably learned at some social club. While Victoria thought about her next move, Diego allowed himself a brief trip down memory lane. 8 years earlier, when he was only 9, he had found a torn chess book in the library trash. He had taken it home hidden in his backpack, and asked Carmen to teach him the basic rules. Midge, why do you want to learn that? His mother had asked, exhausted after a double shift cleaning. To be like the rich kids, Mom. They always say they're smarter than us. At that time, Carmen earned only $600 a month. There was no money for lessons, for a computer, for anything. But there was the public library, which became Diego's second home. Every day after school, he walked 3 kilometers to study historical games in dusty books that no one else touched. Victoria finally played d3, a timid move that revealed her conservative nature in chess and in life. She preferred safe control positions where social class could guarantee victory. Diego responded with nc6, developing with purpose. Each of his moves was executed in less than 5 seconds, as if he were following a mental script he had memorized years ago. Our little boy is moving too fast, Victoria commented to the guests. In real chess, you think before you play. It was then that Diego made his first psychological mistake. He paused, pretended to think deeply for 15 seconds, and played g6, preparing the bishop's fianchetto. It was a move that any beginner would make instinctively, but it was actually part of a complex strategic plan that would take 10 more moves to reveal itself. Ah, you see, Victoria turned triumphantly to the guests. He doesn't have the patience to think. Typical. But Mr. Hamilton, who had played chess at university 40 years ago, recognized the pattern. Victoria, this boy is setting up a fast dragon. What? She replied, annoyed at being interrupted during her demonstration of superiority. It's a variation of the Sicilian. Quite sophisticated. Victoria looked at the board with a new tension in her shoulders. Nonsense. He must have seen it in a movie. But as the moves progressed, something unsettling began to take shape. Diego wasn't just responding to her moves, he was dictating the pace of the game. Every piece he developed occupied exactly the right square, creating a harmony that transformed the board into something resembling a visual symphony. Carmen watched from the corner of the room, her heart racing. She knew Diego was good, but she had never seen him play against someone who took himself so seriously. And for the first time in 20 years of working in that house, she saw fear in Victoria Whitman's eyes. The fear of discovering that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't as special as she had always believed. Each new humiliation Victoria tried to impose only fed something inside Diego that she couldn't see. A silent strength being strengthened by the very injustice she was trying to impose. What those privileged people didn't know was that every act of contempt was signing her own sentence, written on the 64 squares of that board, that would soon become the stage for one of the greatest humiliations in the social history of Beverly Hills. Diego's 10th move revealed something that made Mr. Hamilton choke on his whiskey. The boy had sacrificed a pawn in a seemingly innocent move, but any experienced player would recognize the deadly trap that was being set. Victoria, Hamilton whispered urgently, "This boy is no amateur." But Victoria was too determined to prove her superiority to listen to warnings. "Relax, dear. He must have memorized a few moves from the internet. I'll be done with this in 5 minutes." That's when Diego did something unexpected. He calmly rose from his chair and walked over to Carmen, who was watching everything from the corner of the room with her hands clasped together. "Mom," he said in a low voice that echoed through the tense silence of the room, "remember when you said that one day I would show these people who we really are?" Carmen nodded, her eyes shining with tears. She remembered perfectly. It was the day Diego turned 15, and she didn't even have enough money for a cake. He had found his mother crying in the kitchen of their small house and promised her that one day he would change everything. "That boy has more class than all of us put together," Congresswoman Mills murmured to her husband, watching the interaction between mother and son. Victoria tapped her fingers impatiently on the table. "Can we continue the game? I have other commitments today." Diego returned to the board, but something had changed in his demeanor. He was no longer the shy teenager who had been invited for entertainment. He was a young man who carried years of sacrifice, secret studies, and a determination forged in adversity on his shoulders. Diego's 11th move was executed with surgical precision that made Victoria frown. For the first time, he had created a double threat. If she protected the king, she would lose her queen. If she protected the queen, she would be checkmated in 3 moves. That's not possible," Victoria muttered, studying the board intently for the first time since the match began. That's when Hamilton realized something crucial. "Victoria, you're being outplayed by a kid who's probably never set foot in a formal chess club in his life." While Victoria tried to find a way out of her dilemma, Diego took the opportunity to observe every face in the room. Congresswoman Mills had stopped drinking champagne and was leaning forward, fascinated. The hotel chain owner had put his cell phone aside. Even Hamilton's wife, who had been leafing through a fashion magazine, was now paying full attention to the game. Carmen knew that look on her son's face. It was the same one he had at 12, when he discovered the chess section at the public library. The same look he had for 5 hours straight studying historical games on a slow, broken computer. The same look that made him wake up at 5 o'clock in the morning to solve tactical problems before going to school. Victoria finally made a move, a desperate attempt to escape the trap, but it was too late. Diego had calculated that possibility 6 moves ago. "Check," he said simply, moving his queen to a position that offered 3 different winning continuations. The silence in the room was deafening. Victoria looked at the board, then at Diego, then back at the board. Her hands were shaking slightly, not from fear, but from a contained rage at the realization that she was being systematically destroyed by someone she considered inferior. You must have seen that sequence somewhere, she said, her voice higher than normal. No one learns that on their own. Diego smiled for the first time since the match began. You're right, ma'am. I learned it from Garry Kasparov. Kasparov taught you? Hamilton asked, incredulously. Not personally, Diego replied, moving a piece to what was clearly the final move. But I studied all his documented games, 183. To be exact, he used this particular sequence against Karpov in 1984, game 23 of the World Championship. Victoria looked around the room, searching the faces of the guests for support, but what she found was something she had never seen directed at her: silent disapproval. For the first time in her life, the people around her were not impressed by her performance. Carmen stepped forward, her voice firm and clear. My son woke up every day at 5 in the morning to study before school. He walked 6 miles to the public library because we couldn't afford internet. When I worked double shifts, he stayed up all night solving chess problems by candlelight because our electricity was cut off. The room was completely silent. Now, Diego looked at his mother with a mixture of love and determination that made some of those present look away. Ashamed. Checkmate, Diego said softly, placing his queen in the final position. Victoria stared at the board for a long moment, as if expecting the pieces to change positions on their own. When she finally looked up, she found Diego watching her with the same unruffled calm with which he had begun the game. But now something had completely changed in the dynamics of the room. The guests no longer looked at Diego as entertainment. They looked at him as someone who had just rewritten all their assumptions about talent, class, and merit. And they looked at Victoria with a mixture of embarrassment and disappointment she had never experienced before. What Victoria Whitman didn't know yet was that this defeat on the board would be only the first move in a much larger game that was about to begin. A game where all the social rules she had always taken for granted would be questioned, and where the boy she had underestimated would prove that true nobility has nothing to do with surnames or bank accounts. Victoria stared at the board for 15 seconds that seemed like an eternity. Her trembling fingers touched the fallen king as if they could magically undo the checkmate. The silence in the room was so thick you could hear the ticking of the $15,000 wall clock. That was luck, she muttered, her voice trembling, all previous confidence gone. He must have memorized that specific sequence somewhere. Hamilton rose from his chair and walked over to the board. Victoria, that boy just executed a variation of the Sicilian that even I didn't know. And I've been playing this game for 40 years. Congresswoman Mills pulled out her cell phone and began recording discreetly. As an experienced politician, she immediately recognized the viral value of this moment. A racist millionaire being humiliated by a prodigy she had underestimated. I don't accept that, said Victoria, standing up abruptly and knocking over a few pieces. Something's wrong here. No one learns to play like that on their own. Someone trained him specifically to humiliate me. Diego remained seated, watching her with the same unruffled calm. Would you like a rematch? I can play with anyone here, or all of them at once if you prefer. The comment caused a nervous murmur among the guests. It was an offer that sounded impossible, but after what they had just witnessed, no one dared to doubt him. You're being arrogant now, Victoria retorted, her face red with anger and humiliation. A boy from the slums doesn't talk to his superiors like that. That's when Carmen stepped forward and for the first time in 20 years looked Victoria Whitman directly in the eye without lowering her head. Mrs. Whitman, Carmen said, her voice firm and clear. My son is not from the slums. We are from a working class community, and he is not being arrogant. He is being honest about his abilities. Something you clearly cannot do about yours. The tension in the room rose exponentially. Some guests exchanged uncomfortable glances, realizing they were witnessing something much bigger than a simple chess match. Victoria turned to Carmen with fury. How dare you speak to me that way? Have you forgotten your place in this house? No, Carmen replied calmly. I remembered my worth. Hamilton intervened, clearly uncomfortable with the direction the conversation was taking. Victoria, perhaps we should recognize that the young man is truly talented. Victoria laughed bitterly. Don't you understand? This was set up. Someone trained him specifically to make me look like an idiot in my own home. Diego finally stood up, and when he spoke, his voice carried a maturity that silenced all the adults present. Mrs. Whitman, do you want to know the truth? I wasn't trained to humiliate you. I spent the last 8 years studying chess because I dreamed of playing against people who respected the game, people who understood that talent has no color, social class, or last name. He paused, looking at each person present. When you invited me to play how you play in the slums, I thought I would finally have a chance to show that I deserved respect. But now I realize that you never wanted a fair match. You wanted a show of humiliation. Congresswoman Mills had stopped recording and watched the scene with fascination. How old are you, kid? 17. Diego replied. And how long have you been playing seriously? 8 years. Mills looked at Victoria with an expression that mixed disbelief and disapproval. Victoria, you've just been defeated by a self-taught teenager. A teenager whose family you employ. A teenager you invited to play as a joke. Victoria felt the weight of every gaze in the room, and for the first time in her life, they were not looks of admiration or envy. They were looks of judgment. I didn't know he played seriously. She tried to defend herself, but her voice sounded weak even to her own ears. The question isn't whether he played seriously, Hamilton said clearly, irritated. The question is that you invited him to play assuming he would be easily defeated. Why? Because he's your maid's son. Because he's black. Because he doesn't have money. The silence that followed was devastating. Diego calmly arranged the pieces on the board, each move executed with precision. Thanks for the game, Ms. Whitman. It was educational. When he finished, he turned to his mother. Mom, can we go? I have school tomorrow. Carmen nodded, removing the apron she had worn to serve the guests. But before leaving, she turned to Victoria one last time. Mrs. Whitman, thank you for showing me that my son deserves to be in much better places than this. As mother and son walked toward the door, Congresswoman Mills called out, Diego, are you interested in scholarships? I know some universities that would love to have someone with your talent. Diego stopped and smiled, his first genuine smile of the night. Very interested, ma'am. Mills handed him her card. Call me on Monday. Victoria watched motionless, still processing how she had lost complete control of the situation. In less than an hour, she had gone from respected hostess to the woman who had underestimated a prodigy out of prejudice in front of important witnesses. When the door closed behind Diego and Carmen, the remaining guests looked at each other in awkward silence. Hamilton was the first to stand up. I think I'd better leave, too. One by one, the guests began to leave, offering only cold farewells and disapproving glances. Victoria was left alone in the room, still staring at the board, where her arrogance had been systematically destroyed by a teenager she considered inferior. But what she didn't know was that tonight would be just the first move in a much bigger game. One where Diego Santos would rewrite not only his own history, but question the entire system of privilege that people like Victoria Whitman took for granted. As Diego walked home with his mother under the Beverly Hills stars, he carried in His pocket the card that would change his life forever, and in his mind, he was already calculating not just chess moves, but moves in a much bigger game. The game of proving that true nobility cannot be bought with money, but is earned with character. 6 months later, Diego Santos walked through the halls of Stanford University with a full scholarship to study engineering. Congresswoman Mills had kept her promise, connecting him not only with academic opportunities, but with a whole world of people who recognized talent, regardless of social background. The video of that night in Beverly Hills had gone viral. 3 million views in 2 weeks. Not because someone had recorded the match, but because Congresswoman Mills herself had shared the story on her social media, turning Diego into a symbol of overcoming adversity and Victoria into an example of what not to do when you have privilege. Young prodigy destroys prejudiced millionaire in chess was the headline that circulated all over the internet. The comments were relentless. What a shame. For that woman and that boy deserves every opportunity in the world. Dominated the response sections. Victoria Whitman had become persona non grata in her own social circles. The golf club canceled her membership after pressure from other members. 3 charities removed her name from events. Even Hamilton, her friend of decades, began to avoid her at social gatherings. Victoria has always been arrogant, but I never imagined she could be so cruel, Hamilton's wife commented during a dinner in Malibu. To humiliate a child like that in front of everyone. The worst part for Victoria was realizing that Diego had never sought revenge or exposure. He had simply played chess, something he did naturally, with a mastery developed through years of quiet dedication. The humiliation she felt was self-inflicted, a direct result of her own prejudiced assumptions. Carmen had been promoted to cleaning supervisor at a 5-star hotel in Santa Monica, a job that paid 3 times as much and came with full medical benefits. It wasn't charity, it was recognition of the professionalism she had always demonstrated, now finally valued by employers who saw beyond prejudice. Diego founded a free online chess program that connected young people from underserved communities with college mentors. In less than 6 months, 1,200 children were learning not just how to move pieces, but life strategies that no formal classroom could teach. Chess taught me that every person has unique strategic value, Diego explained. During an interview with CNN, Victoria Whitman taught me that some people need to lose everything to learn what really matters. When asked if he held a grudge against the woman who tried to humiliate him, Diego smiled with the same calm he had shown on that fateful night. Grudges are pieces that only get in the way of the game. I prefer to focus on what I can build. Victoria watched that interview alone in her mansion, now empty of the friends who had abandoned her. For the first time, she truly understood what she had lost that night. Not just a chess match, but the opportunity to be a better person. Hamilton called once after the incident, just to say, "Victoria, you created that situation." Diego just responded with a class you should have shown from the beginning. The lesson echoed beyond Beverly Hills. Diego proved that true nobility does not come from surnames or bank accounts, but from character forged in adversity and demonstrated through actions. He turned prejudice into purpose, the humiliation of others into his own growth. Today, when Diego looks to the future, he sees no limitations imposed by others, but possibilities created by his own determination. Victoria had tried to diminish him to make herself feel bigger, but she ended up revealing that true greatness is measured by the ability to lift others up, not tear them down. Carmen proudly framed a photo of Diego receiving his first academic honorable mention at Stanford. On the wall next to it, a certificate from the chess program that had already impacted thousands of young people, achievements that no money could buy and no prejudice could steal. The best revenge, as Diego discovered, is not to destroy those who try to diminish you. It is to build something so extraordinary that their mediocrity becomes irrelevant by comparison. Victoria Whitman tried to make him entertainment, but Diego Santos became inspiration. And that difference defines not only who wins at chess, but who wins in life. If this story of overcoming adversity and justice touched your heart, subscribe to the channel for more stories that prove that true power does not lie in having privileges, but in turning obstacles into opportunities for extraordinary growth.